You are sick. You are crazy. Who do you need besides me? He repeated these words to me every day, and I believed him. I truly believed that I was going crazy. And then I found it in his suitcase, a marriage certificate to another woman, dated last year, and next to it lay another one, with a third woman, and a passport in a name I had never heard. The man I shared a bed with for 6 months, who I gave my apartment keys to, who I almost sold the cottage to. This person didn't exist. Gerald Patrick Robertson was a fiction, a beautiful, warm, convincing fiction, created especially for people like me, for single women with a house and savings. I'm 63 years old, and I thought life couldn't surprise me anymore. It's important for me to know I'm not alone. Stay, I'll tell you everything from the very beginning. Dear friends, before we continue, please write which country you're watching this video from. It'll be interesting to see how far this story has spread. Enjoy listening. Bob died on a Thursday. For some reason, I remember that exactly, the day of the week. Not the date, not the time, but that it was Thursday. I was just about to go to the farmer's market for cottage cheese, because on Thursdays they brought in fresh farm products. Bob loved it. He loved to spread it on rye bread, sprinkle it with sugar, and drink tea. I stood in the hallway already wearing my coat, and I heard a strange sound from the living room, like something heavy fell to the floor. I wasn't even scared at first. I thought he dropped the TV remote again. He was always dropping it. And when I walked into the room, he was lying on the floor near his chair, and his eyes were open, but they were looking somewhere past me, toward the ceiling. "Bob," I said, and again, "Bobby." He didn't answer. He could no longer answer. The doctors later said it was a massive heart attack. They said he died instantly, didn't suffer. I don't know if that was supposed to comfort me. Probably it should have. But I stood there at the hospital, signing some papers, and kept thinking about that cottage cheese I never bought, about how Bob would never spread it on bread again. And for some reason, that seemed like the most terrible thing. We lived together for 40 years, met at a dance at the community center. I was working in accounting at the auto parts factory at the time, and he was an engineer, tall, with a mustache, serious. All the girls were looking at him, and he walked up to me. "May I have this dance?" he asked. And I went. And then I followed him my whole life. It can't be said that we lived like a fairy tale. All sorts of things happened. We argued and gave each other the silent treatment for a week. I cried into my pillow, and he slammed the door. But it was real life, with pot roast on Sundays, with trips to the lake house, with our daughter Susan, who grew up and went off to New York to study, got married, got divorced, got married again. Bob had been sick for the last 3 years. First blood pressure, then his heart, then his legs started to swell. He couldn't work around the lake house anymore like before. He just sat on the porch and watched me plant tomatoes, grumbled that I was tying them up wrong, that the stakes were crooked. I snapped back. He got offended. We didn't speak until dinner. And then he took my hand and said, "Tammy, I'm sorry. It's hard to sit idle." I understood. For a man who had been building, repairing, creating his whole life, sitting idle was torture. In the last year, he hardly got up from his recliner. I brought him food, helped him get to the bathroom, changed the sheets. At night, he coughed, and I woke up at every sound, listening to make sure he was breathing. Our daughter called from New York and asked, "Mom, how's Dad?" I answered, "He's holding on." She promised to come. She came once every 2 months, on weekends, brought some expensive medications that didn't change anything. And then he died on Thursday when I was going to get cottage cheese. After the funeral, the apartment became huge, a 2-bedroom unit in a small complex on the outskirts of Columbus, only 900 square feet. But it seemed like I was living in an empty warehouse. Every sound echoed, the ticking of the clock in the kitchen, the humming of the refrigerator, the creaking of the floorboards in the hallway that Bob had always meant to fix, and never got around to. I woke up at 5 a.m. like I'd gotten used to during the years of caring for him, and lay in the dark, listening to the silence. Then I got up, made tea, sat by the window, watched the light come in, looked at the empty cup. The day dragged on endlessly. I tried to keep myself busy. I cleaned, but the apartment was already clean. There was no one to make a mess. I cooked, but a pot of soup lasted me 3 days by myself. I watched TV, but all those soap operas about love and betrayal seemed so stupid, so far from real life. My daughter called once a week, every Sunday, exactly at 7 p.m. The conversation lasted 15 minutes. She seemed to time it with a stopwatch. "How are you, Mom? What's new? Are you eating okay? Well, that's good. I've got work here, meetings, you understand. Love you, bye." And dial tone. I wasn't offended. Truly, I wasn't. Susan has her own life. A husband, a job at some company with an unpronounceable English name, a mortgage. She barely has time to breathe. I understood that. My pension was small, but enough for one. The savings in my account came to about $85,000. Bob and I had saved our whole lives for a rainy day. We didn't go to resorts, didn't buy new furniture, didn't trade in the car. We kept putting it off. Now that money just sat there, waiting for something unclear. And there was one more thing. The lake house. A 1/4-acre lot in a place called Oak Hills, 40 minutes by car from the city. A wooden cabin that my father built in the 70s. The apple trees he planted, the garden beds where I grew up. Mom died 10 years ago, Dad 15, and the lake house remained. Bob didn't love it. Too far, uncomfortable, rough roads. But I went every summer, like a pilgrimage. I spent the first year after Bob's death as if in a fog. I woke up, sat by the window, sorted through old receipts, stared at nothing, and went to bed. Sometimes I went to the store for bread and milk. Sometimes my friend Ginny called, the only one who hadn't disappeared from my life after retirement. We worked together in accounting, sat at neighboring desks for 20 years, gossiped about the bosses, cried on each other's shoulders after arguments with our husbands. Ginny became a widow 5 years before me. She knew what I was going through. She came over without warning, with pies, with a bottle of homemade blackberry wine, with magazines I never read. She sat silently beside me when I couldn't speak. She talked when the silence became unbearable. One day, a year after Bob's death, she said, "Tammy, you can't go on like this. You're still alive." I looked at her and didn't understand what she meant. Of course I'm alive. I breathe, I eat, I sleep. What else is there? "You're not living," Ginny said. "You're waiting for God knows what." She was right. I was waiting. Every day, every hour, I was waiting. Not knowing for what exactly. Maybe for the moment when all this would end. Maybe for when it would get easier. Maybe for when I would learn not to listen for movement in the next room, waiting to hear a voice that was no longer there. You can't get used to silence. I thought I would get used to it over time, like people get used to everything. But a year passed, and then another 6 months, and that echoing emptiness still pressed on my ears, filled the rooms with stuffiness, especially in the evenings. When it got dark outside and the TV became unbearable to watch, I sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea that had gone cold and didn't even notice myself talking to Bob, asking him if he wanted dinner, if his back hurt, if he could change the channel because I couldn't find the remote. And then I would catch myself and fall silent. And the silence after that was even more terrible. At first, I went to the cemetery every week. Bob's grave was at the edge of the section, near a young maple. I planted flowers, pulled weeds, sat on a little bench, and talked to him. About what I'd watched on TV, about how the neighbor upstairs had gotten a dog that barked all night, about Susan calling and saying everything was fine. Bob didn't answer, of course, but I seemed to hear his voice anyway, his when he was listening but thinking about something else, his, "Well, that's how it goes," when he didn't know what to say. I heard it so clearly that sometimes I forgot he wasn't there. Time passed strangely. Days stretched out, weeks flew by. I looked at the calendar and couldn't believe it had already been a year and a half since the funeral. It seemed like just yesterday I was standing by his casket, accepting condolences, and at the same time, like it was a whole lifetime ago. At 63, you think about death differently. Not with fear, but with something like curiosity. I wondered what was there, beyond. Is there anything at all? Will I see Bob, Mom, Dad? Or is there just nothing, emptiness, like before birth? Sometimes this thought calmed me. Sometimes it scared me. Most often, I simply didn't think about it. There's no point in thinking about the inevitable. And then spring came again, and I went to the lake house for the first time since Bob's death. The bus, I drove my old Buick, and even the familiar roads seemed different, more empty somehow, more quiet. I got there and couldn't bring myself to go in for a long time. I stood at the gate and looked at the overgrown garden beds, the house with its peeling paint, the apple tree that Dad had planted and that had somehow gotten so old, so hunched. Finally, I went in. The house smelled of must and time. Dust lay on everything like snow. I walked through the rooms, touching things. Mom's embroidery on the wall, Dad's tools in the shed, the old radio that hadn't worked for 20 years but that no one had the heart to throw away. Everything here held memories, and memories held pain. But it was a good pain, clean, not like that dull, pressing ache that waited for me at home. I stayed at the lake house for 3 days. I cleaned, ventilated, even dug up one garden bed. My back ached, my hands wouldn't obey me, but I felt alive for the first time in a year and a half. On the second day, my neighbor came over, Fred, a retired man of about 70, gray-haired, stooped, quiet. He had lived next door for 15 years, helped my father, then helped Bob when we came for the summer. He knocked on the fence post and asked, "You okay, Mrs. Thompson? Need any help?" I said, "No, thank you. I'm managing." He nodded and left. But the next morning, I found a bundle of kindling by my door, neatly tied with twine. Fred's handiwork. I recognized it. That day, for the first time in many months, I smiled. I came back to the city, but something had changed. The apartment seemed less empty, the silence less suffocating. I started going out more often, to the store, to the park, just for walks around the neighborhood. I even went to the senior center that Ginny had been dragging me to for a year. And that's where I met him. He was sitting by the window, reading a newspaper. Tall, gray-haired, with a neat beard and intelligent eyes. Something about him immediately caught my attention. Maybe his posture. Maybe the way he held the paper. Maybe just that he was the only man in this hall full of women. "Is this seat taken?" I asked, pointing to the empty chair next to him. He raised his head, smiled, and said, "Please." That's how it began. His name was Gerald. Gerald Patrick Robertson. A widower, retired college professor, moved to Columbus 2 months ago from somewhere in Pennsylvania. He spoke beautifully, correctly, intelligently, as if choosing each word carefully. He asked about me, and I started talking and couldn't stop. About Bob, about my daughter, about the lake house, about the silence that was eating me alive. He listened, really listened, not like when people are just waiting for you to finish so they can say their piece. He nodded, asked clarifying questions, sympathized, and his sympathy felt genuine, warm, not like those formal condolences I'd had to endure after Bob's death. When we said goodbye, he asked, "Can I call you?" I gave him my number. He called the next day, and the day after. We talked for hours about books, movies, life. He had amazing stories about his work at the university, his travels, his late wife, whom he'd loved very much and missed terribly. "You understand what it's like," he said. "You know what it means to lose the person you woke up to every morning for decades. Not everyone understands that." I understood. Oh, how I understood. We started meeting outside the senior center. Coffee shop, park, the little Italian restaurant near my place where I'd never dared go alone. Gerald paid for everything, and when I tried to protest, he smiled and said, "Let me. It brings me joy." A month later, he first called me dear, and I didn't mind. 2 months later, darling. 3 months later, he said he loved me. It was strange to hear those words at 63 from a man I'd known for only 3 months, but it was also nice. I had forgotten what it was like when someone looks at you like that, with warmth, with tenderness, when someone wants to be near, wants to listen, wants to take care of you. "I love you too," I said, and I meant it, or at least I thought I did. Everything happened quickly after that. Gerald started visiting more often, first once a week, then twice, then almost every day. He brought flowers, candy, once even cooked dinner himself, badly, but so touchingly that I nearly cried. He talked about how lonely he'd been before he met me, how life finally made sense again. "You saved me, Tammy," he said. "You gave me a reason to get up in the morning." I felt the same way. For the first time in almost 2 years, I wasn't alone. For the first time, the silence in the apartment didn't press down because there was someone to share it with. 6 months after we met, Gerald said, "Tammy, I'm spending so much time here anyway. My apartment is far away, and these constant drives are exhausting. What would you think if I moved in?" I wasn't ready for this question. Or rather, I thought I wasn't. But when I looked into his eyes, so sincere, so hopeful, I couldn't refuse. "Okay," I said. He moved in within a week. A suitcase of clothes, a box of books, his favorite coffee mug. Not much, but enough to make the apartment feel fuller, warmer. The first weeks were wonderful. I woke up and someone was beside me. Someone made breakfast while I was in the shower. Someone asked how I slept, how I was feeling, what I wanted for dinner. I forgot what this is like, I told Ginny, living with someone, not being alone. She looked at me strangely but said, "As long as you're happy." I was happy, or so I thought. The first strange incident happened about a month after Gerald moved in. I came home from the store and couldn't find my reading glasses. I always put them in the same place, on the little table by the bed, but they weren't there. "Gerald, have you seen my glasses?" I asked. "What glasses?" He was surprised. "My reading glasses. I always put them on the nightstand." "Tammy, dear, you haven't worn those glasses in years. Don't you remember? You said yourself that you don't need them anymore." I froze. What was he talking about? I wore them every day, for reading, for my crossword puzzles. I couldn't read without them. That can't be right," I mumbled. "Darling, don't worry," he hugged me. "It happens at our age. Memory plays tricks. It's nothing scary." I let it go. Maybe I really had said something like that. Maybe I really had put the glasses somewhere else. I'm 63 after all, not a young woman. Memory really does get worse. The glasses turned up 3 days later in the kitchen drawer, under some towels. How they got there, I couldn't understand. I never kept glasses in the kitchen. But Gerald just shrugged. "See? You put them there yourself and forgot. It happens, sweetheart. Don't worry about it." I tried not to worry, but something gnawed at me. Then it started happening more and more often. I couldn't find things that I clearly remembered putting in their usual places. TV remote, phone, keys. They would disappear and then turn up in the strangest spots. The refrigerator, a coat pocket, a shoe in the closet. And every time Gerald reacted the same way. "Tammy, sweetheart, you did it yourself. You just don't remember. It's nothing. It happens." I began to doubt myself. Maybe I really was losing my mind. Maybe this was the beginning of dementia, that terrifying disease that took my grandmother from us. She lived her last years not recognizing anyone, thinking she was a little girl, calling my mother by her sister's name. Was the same thing happening to me? I went to the doctor, had tests done, an MRI, talked to a neurologist. The results were fine. No signs of dementia, no pathologies, no deviations. The doctor said, "For your age, you're in excellent shape. Just normal age-related changes. Nothing serious." But if I was healthy, then why was I forgetting things? Why couldn't I remember what I did yesterday, where I put the remote, what I said to Gerald this morning? "Because you're stressed," Gerald explained. "You've been through a lot. Your husband's death, loneliness. The psyche protects itself, blocks out some memories. It's normal, dear. I'm here. I'll take care of you." I believed him. What else could I do? One evening we were having dinner and Gerald said, "Tammy, I've been thinking. You have that lake house, right?" "Yes, in Oak Hills." "And you hardly ever go there, do you?" "Well, not often anymore. It's hard for me alone. And the drive." "Here's what I'm thinking." He put down his fork, looked at me seriously. "Maybe we should sell it? The property, the upkeep, it's all expenses. And the money would come in handy. We could take a trip, see California like you always dreamed." I really had always dreamed of seeing California, and Gerald knew that. I'd told him. But sell the lake house? Mom and Dad's house? The apple trees Dad planted? The garden beds where I grew up? "I don't know," I said hesitantly. It's the family place. Memories." "I understand, dear, I understand." Gerald took my hand. "But memories live in your heart, not in wood and soil. And those memories aren't going anywhere. But the house is just standing there, empty, rotting, costing money. Think about it. No rush, just think about it." I said I'd think about it. And I thought. Thought for a long time, for weeks. And the more I thought, the more Gerald's arguments seemed sensible. Really, what was I holding on to? I hadn't been to the lake house in a year, or even longer. And even when I came, what did I do? Sat on the porch, looked at the overgrown garden, and cried. What kind of life was that? And California? That was the ocean, the sun, palm trees. I'd seen them in pictures all my life, dreamed about them, and never made it there. Bob was always too busy. Then he got sick. And now here was a chance. Maybe the last chance. "Okay," I said to Gerald a month later. "Let's sell it." His face lit up. He hugged me, kissed me, said what a wise decision it was, that we would be so happy, that this was just the beginning of our new life. I believed him. I wanted so much to believe. The process started. Gerald said he'd handle everything, find a realtor, handle the paperwork, so I wouldn't have to stress. I was grateful. I really didn't want to deal with all that bureaucracy. But then Ginny stopped by. It was a weekday, midday. Gerald was out somewhere, said he had some errands. Ginny came without calling, like she always did, with pies and her homemade wine. "Tammy, I need to talk to you," she said, sitting down in the kitchen. "Talk." "It's about Gerald." I tensed up. Ginny had never liked him, I knew that. She was always looking at him suspiciously, asking strange questions. I thought she was just jealous. She was alone, and I had found someone. "What about Gerald?" "Tammy, don't you think it's strange?" Ginny looked me straight in the eyes. "You meet a man, and 2 months later he moves into your apartment. He doesn't work, doesn't have his own money, at least it seems that way, and now you're selling the lake house? Ginny, he's a retired professor. Have you checked that? Have you seen his documents? His pension statements?" I went silent. No, I hadn't seen any documents. Hadn't even thought to ask. Why would I? I trusted Gerald. "Tammy, I'm not trying to hurt you," Ginny continued, "but I've seen these stories. There are people, especially men, who prey on lonely widows. They look for women with property, with savings. Gerald is not like that," I cut her off. "He loves me. We're going to California together." "On whose money?" "On the money from selling the lake house." "And whose name is on the house?" "Mine, of course." "And when it's sold, whose bank account will the money go into?" I fell silent. I hadn't thought about that. Gerald had said he'd handle all the paperwork. I had signed something. What exactly? "Tammy," Ginny took my hands, "just promise me you'll be careful. Check the documents. Don't sign anything else until you read every line, okay?" I promised. That evening I tried to talk to Gerald about it, carefully, not wanting to offend him. "Gerald, those documents I signed for the sale, can I look at them again?" His face changed. Just for a moment, but I noticed. "What documents, dear?" "The ones for the lake house. I just want to make sure everything's in order." "Tammy, don't you trust me?" He sounded hurt. "I spent all day on this, running around to lawyers, and now you don't trust me?" No, of course I trust you. I just want to understand." "You know what? Fine." He stood up from the table. "If you don't trust me, if you think I'm some kind of crook, then maybe I should leave. Maybe this was a mistake. Gerald, I didn't say that. You didn't have to say it. I can see it in your eyes. You talked to your friend, right? Ginny? She's always looked at me like I'm a criminal, and now she's turned you against me. I felt terrible. I hurt the man who loved me, who took care of me, who brought warmth back into my life. And for what? Because of Ginny's paranoid fantasies? Forgive me, I said. I was wrong. I trust you. I really do. Gerald softened. He sat back down, took my hand. Tammy, I understand. You've been hurt. You've been alone for a long time. It's hard for you to trust. But I'm not going anywhere. I love you. I just want us to be happy. I believed him. I wanted so much to believe. But that night I lay in bed and couldn't fall asleep. Ginny's words kept circling in my head. And I thought, well, what harm would it be to look at those documents? Just to reassure myself, for peace of mind. In the morning, when Gerald went out for a run, he ran every morning, said it was good for his health, I went to his desk. He kept all his papers in a small leather briefcase, always locked, but I knew where he kept the key, in his jacket pocket. My hands were shaking. I felt like a thief in my own home, but I had to know. I opened the briefcase. Inside were documents, lots of documents. I pulled out the first folder, started reading. A power of attorney, giving Gerald Patrick Robertson the right to act on behalf of Tamara Jane Thompson in all matters relating to the sale of real estate. I hadn't signed any power of attorney. I remembered signing something, once, quickly. Gerald said it was just a formality, for the realtor. But this was something different. This gave him the right to sell my lake house, my house, and take the money. What else was in there? I dug further. Another document, something about the bank account, my account, something about adding a co-signatory. Wait, Gerald had access to my savings? My heart was pounding. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the papers. And then I saw it. At the very bottom of the briefcase, under all the other papers, another folder. I opened it. A marriage certificate. Gerald Patrick Robertson and some woman named Michelle Davis. Dated last year. Just a year ago. But he said his wife died. He said he'd been a widower for 3 years. I flipped further. Another certificate. A different name. Linda Monroe. Dated 2 years ago. And then a passport. A Pennsylvania driver's license. And another passport. And another. And they all had the same photo, the same face, Gerald's face, but different names. James Parker, Robert Stevens, William Morrison. I sat there on the floor surrounded by papers and couldn't breathe. The man who lived in my apartment, the man I called dear, the man I almost sold my parents' house for, this person didn't exist. Gerald Patrick Robertson was a fiction, a mask, one of many. I don't know how long I sat like that, minutes, maybe hours, until I heard the sound of a key in the lock. He walked in, flushed from his run, in shorts and a t-shirt, smiling. "Tammy, I'm home. Want me to make coffee?" He stopped when he saw me, on the floor, surrounded by documents, with the briefcase open. "What are you doing?" His voice changed. It was no longer warm and caring, cold, sharp. "Who are you?" I whispered. "Tammy, I can explain." "Who are you?" I was almost screaming. "These documents, these names, you lied to me about everything." He was silent for a moment, and then something happened that I will never forget. His face changed. Not the expression, the face itself. As if a mask slipped off. As if before me stood a completely different person. "Well, well," he said quietly. "How unfortunate. Everything was going so well." He took a step toward me. I scrambled back. "Don't touch me. Get out. Get out of my house." "Your house," he laughed. A cold, unfamiliar laugh. "Sweetheart, in a week this house was supposed to be mine. Like the lake house. Like your savings. Like everything you have." "I'll call the police." "Go ahead. Call," he shrugged. "What will you tell them? That your boyfriend has multiple passports? That's not a crime. That you signed the documents yourself? Your signature, your handwriting. Everything is legal and proper. I grabbed my phone, dialed 911. Yes, hello? Police? Please come to 247 Maple Street, apartment 4B. There's a man in my home. He's scaring me. I want him to leave. Gerald, or whatever his real name was, watched me calmly. He didn't even try to stop me. You're making a mistake, Tammy, he said. A big mistake. I would have taken care of you. I would have made everything nice. And now you'll be alone again. Completely alone. The police came in 15 minutes. 2 officers, young guys. They asked what was going on. I tried to explain about the documents, the passports, the fake names. They listened, looked at Gerald. Sir, can you show us some identification? Gerald handed them a driver's license. Gerald Patrick Robertson, Columbus, Ohio. Everything in order. Ma'am, is there a restraining order against this man? Is he threatening you? He has fake documents. Look in his briefcase. Ma'am, we can't search personal belongings without a warrant. If you want him to leave, he has to leave voluntarily, or you need to go through formal eviction. Eviction? This is my apartment. But he lives here, correct? With your permission? Then by law, he's a tenant. I couldn't believe my ears. This con man, this criminal, and I couldn't even kick him out of my own home? Gerald smiled sweetly. Officers, I understand there's a misunderstanding. My partner has been feeling a little confused lately, memory problems. I've been trying to help her, but maybe I should give her some space. I'll leave for now. Tammy, dear, I'll be in touch when you feel better. And he left, just picked up his briefcase and walked out the door. And I was left standing there, shaking, staring at the 2 young cops who looked at me like I was a crazy old lady. Ma'am, are you sure you're all right? Should we call someone? I said no, everything was fine, thank you for coming. After they left, I sat down on the kitchen floor and cried for the first time since Bob's funeral. Cried from fear, from humiliation, from the feeling of complete powerlessness, and from the realization that I almost lost everything. Everything my parents built, everything Bob and I saved, because I was lonely and believed a beautiful lie. The next day, I went to a lawyer, a young woman, smart, professional. I told her everything. She listened, looked at the documents I brought, and sighed heavily. Mrs. Thompson, you got lucky. Lucky? Lucky that you found out in time. Most of his victims, and I'm sure there were others, they only find out when it's too late, when the money's already gone, the property's sold. So he's a professional? Most likely. This type of crime is called romance fraud. They find vulnerable women, usually widows, divorced, establish trust, move in, and then slowly take control of their finances. Can anything be done? Can he be caught? She hesitated. Proving it is difficult. All the documents you signed were signed voluntarily. He didn't forge your signature. He didn't forge the papers. Technically, everything was legal. It was just that you didn't fully understand what you were signing. Because he told me it was just a formality. I understand, but proving that in court is nearly impossible. I felt despair washing over me. So he'll just walk away, find another woman, and do the same thing? Unfortunately, most likely yes, unless one of his victims can prove real fraud, or if he makes a mistake somewhere. I left the lawyer's office and wandered the streets for a long time. I couldn't go home. There, in my apartment, everything still smelled of him. His cologne, his books, his lies. I ended up at Ginny's place. Ginny, you were right, I said from the doorway, about everything. She didn't say, I told you so, didn't ask questions. She just let me in, sat me at the table, and made me tea. Tell me everything, she said. And I told her. About the documents, the passports, the marriage certificates, about the police who couldn't do anything, about the lawyer who said it was almost impossible to prove. Ginny listened silently, and then said, Okay, here's what we're going to do. She turned out to be more savvy than I thought. She found websites dedicated to romance fraud victims, forums where women, and some men, shared their stories. Many described the same methods: charming strangers, memory issues, controlling finances. And some described the same man. "Look," Ginny showed me one post, "a woman from Pittsburgh, 2 years ago. She describes a man named Robert Stevens. Look at the description. Tall, gray-haired, neat beard, cultured speech. Does that remind you of anyone?" It reminded me. It reminded me a lot. We started digging. Found 3 more women in 3 different states who had fallen victim to the same man. Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Connecticut. Different names, but the same methods, the same handsome face. "We need to go to the police," Ginny said. "I already went. They can't do anything. With this, they can." She pointed at the computer screen. "This is already a pattern. Serial fraud, maybe even organized crime." I wasn't sure anything would come of it, but I went. Talked to a detective, showed him what Ginny and I had found. He listened much more carefully than those young officers. "Mrs. Thompson, this is very valuable information," he said. "It looks like you've become the victim of a professional romance scammer. With your permission, we'll open a case and try to find this man." I gave my permission. Signed a bunch more papers, gave a detailed statement describing everything I remembered about Gerald, his habits, his stories, what he'd said about his past. And then I went home. The apartment was empty. Gerald had come while I was out and taken his things. All his things, down to the coffee mug, as if he'd never been there. But he had been, and I felt his presence in every corner, in every shadow. I couldn't stay there. I called Ginny and asked if I could stay with her for a few days. She said, "Of course, stay as long as you need." I spent a month at her place, a month of fear, shame, sleepless nights. I was afraid he would come back, afraid he would call, afraid he would somehow still take everything I had. He didn't call, didn't come. He just vanished, as if he'd dissolved into thin air, along with all those other names, those other faces. The detective called once and said they were working on it, but Gerald Patrick Robertson, or whoever he really was, had disappeared without a trace, probably in another state now, under a different name, with a different victim. I was left alone with my shame and my fear. And here's what hurt most, even more than the almost lost money, even more than the threat of losing the lake house. Knowing that I had been used, that all those conversations, all those feelings, all those words about love, it was all a lie, a performance, a well-rehearsed act. I thought I'd found happiness. I thought I'd found a person who understood me, who loved me. But there was no person, just an empty space in a human shape. And I felt like a fool, a stupid old woman who fell for the first pretty words, who almost gave away everything she had because she was so scared of loneliness. Ginny said I shouldn't blame myself. She said he was a professional, a con artist, that anyone could fall for it. But I didn't believe her. I thought there was something wrong with me, that I should have seen through it, should have understood sooner. "Tammy, stop," Ginny said one evening. "You're not stupid. You're kind. That's not the same thing." "Kindness is weakness," I said bitterly. "No, kindness is strength, and that bastard knew how to use it against you. But that's not your fault. It's his." I wanted to believe her. I really did. Slowly, very slowly, I started coming back to life. I returned to my apartment, cleaned everything out, threw away everything that reminded me of him, repainted the walls, I'd been wanting to for years, rearranged the furniture. It was still my home, my Bob's home, and no one could take that from me. I went to the bank, closed the old account, opened a new one, changed all my passwords, all my PINs. The lawyer helped me revoke the power of attorney I'd signed. And the lake house? The lake house remained mine. I never signed the final sale papers. By some miracle, or because Ginny came to visit that day, I found out the truth in time. The first winter after Gerald was hard. Short days, long nights, loneliness. I hardly left the house, just to the store, the pharmacy. I was afraid of people, afraid of conversations. I didn't trust anyone anymore. Things got easier in the spring. The sun came out, the snow melted, and suddenly I wanted to go to the lake house. For the first time in many months, I wanted to. The drive was bumpy as always, but I looked out the window at the flickering trees, the first greenery, the sky, and I felt something letting go inside me. Fred was waiting at the gate, as if he knew. "Mrs. Thompson, welcome." "Hi, Fred." The property looked well tended. The grass was trimmed, the trees whitewashed, the garden beds dug up. "Did you do this?" "Well, yeah," he shrugged. "I live right next door anyway. Why let it go to waste?" I stood in the middle of my lot, my parents' lot, my home, and couldn't speak. My throat tightened. "Fred, Mrs. Thompson, sit down." We sat on the porch in the gathering twilight, in silence. Then I started talking. Everything, from the very beginning. How I met Gerald, how he moved in, how I started having memory lapses, how I thought I was going crazy, when I found the documents, how I threw him out. Fred listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't gasp, didn't sigh, just listened attentively, seriously. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Mrs. Thompson, it's not your fault." "I know, everyone tells me that." "No, you don't understand." He looked into my eyes. "He's a criminal, and you're alive. Alive, you understand? You got through it. You figured it out. You won." My voice trembled. "I sometimes doubt myself, my memory. He spent so long trying to convince me I was going crazy." "Your memory is fine," Fred said firmly. "It was fine, it is fine, it will be fine. I've known you for 15 years. You don't forget anything." Simple words, but they changed something. For the first time, I didn't write it down in a notebook. I just believed it. We sat on the porch until it got dark. He talked about his life, sparse, brief, like always, about his wife who died 5 years ago, about his daughter in Cleveland, about his grandchildren who come visit for Christmas. "You're lonely too?" I asked. "Yep," he didn't deny it, "but I'm used to it." I thought I was used to it too, and then he showed up, and I realized I wasn't used to it. I'd just given up. Giving up isn't the same as living. "Yeah, I understand that now." We were quiet. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, "here's the thing I wanted to say. If you need anything, any help, or just someone to talk to, I'm right here." "Thank you, Fred." "You're welcome." He left when it was completely dark. I was alone, but it was good loneliness, peaceful. For the first time in many months, I fell asleep right away and didn't dream. The summer turned out warm. I spent more and more time at the lake house. First weekends, then a week, then 2. Fred came by every day, sometimes to help with something, sometimes just to sit nearby, to share the silence. We talked about kids, about life, about the past. He told me about his 30 years working as a carpenter at a furniture factory, about the things he'd made with his own hands, cabinets, tables, dressers. Some were still standing in homes all over Columbus. "Working with your hands is good," he said. "You see the result. Not like office work, papers here, papers there, and what did you accomplish? Hard to say." I laughed. I'd worked with papers and accounting my whole life, and now I understood what he meant. One day he brought me a small box made of light wood with a carved lid. "This is for you." I took it and turned it over in my hands. The work was fine and elegant. The lid had carved leaves and berries. "Raspberries," I said. "Yeah," he blushed a little. "You like raspberries, I remember." I looked at this box, at the hours of work, the attention to detail, and something squeezed in my chest. "Fred, this is wonderful." "Aw, it's nothing." But it wasn't nothing. It was a confession. Silent, awkward, but a confession. I didn't know what to do with it. I was 63 years old. After everything that happened, after Gerald, after months of fear and distrust, I wasn't ready for a new relationship. But Fred didn't rush, didn't pressure, didn't demand anything. He was just there. He fixed what was broken, brought apples from his garden, listened when I needed to talk, was silent when words weren't needed. It was a different kind of closeness. No passion, no pretty words, no promises of eternal love. It was reliability, presence, quiet care that didn't ask for anything in return. I remembered Gerald, his charm, his compliments, his perfection. All lies. A beautiful package hiding emptiness. And Fred was real. Awkward, quiet, simple, but real. One evening when we were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, I said, "Fred, you've been fixing my fence for 3 years, oiling the gate, bringing raspberries. Why?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Because you're a good person, Mrs. Thompson, and because," he hesitated, "because I like taking care of you." I took his hand, big, rough, calloused from tools. "Thank you," I said, "for everything." He didn't answer, just squeezed my hand, carefully, gently. We sat like that until it got dark, and I felt good. A year has passed since Gerald disappeared from my life. The case was never opened. The detective called one last time and said, "Insufficient evidence of a crime." I wasn't surprised. He got away unpunished again, like he had 7 times before. Sometimes I think about him. Where is he now? What city? What woman? Playing the role of the perfect man again, saying all the right words again, convincing someone else she's losing her mind. Probably yes. Predators don't change. But I've changed. I'm not afraid of my memory anymore. I don't write down every conversation, don't check 10 times whether I turned off the stove. I trust myself again, and that might be the main victory. Susan comes once a month now and calls twice a week, just like she promised. We actually talk, not on a schedule. Ginny still brings pies and gossip. We drink tea, laugh, remember our younger days. And Fred is near. We don't live together, each in our own house, 3 lots apart, but we see each other every day, drink tea on the porch, talk, share the silence. I don't know what happens next. Maybe someday I'll be ready for more. Maybe not. It doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm not alone anymore. And not because someone is there, but because I learned to see the ones who were always there. I think about what happened, about how easily we mistake lies for love when we're lonely. Pretty words, attention, care. We're so hungry for it that we're ready to believe anyone. Ready to overlook the strangeness, explain away the inexplicable, justify the unjustifiable. And how dangerous it is when someone uses that hunger, when someone makes us doubt our own minds. Now I know what that hell I went through is called. Gaslighting. A word that hides an attempt to steal a person's soul. But there's something else, too. There are people who don't speak pretty words, who don't promise eternal love, who are just there. Fixing steps no one asked them to fix, bringing raspberries no one ordered, listening when things are bad, staying silent when words are unnecessary. We look for love in handsome strangers with all the right words, and meanwhile, it's quietly fixing a fence we never even mentioned. Dear friends, that's the story. Write in the comments, has anything like this happened in your life? Do you know your own Fred? Let's talk about it. Thank you for listening to the end. Other videos are available in the Timeless Words channel playlist, Stories About People. Now it's appeared on screen.